Welcome to Metanoia Amour, a series of encounters created by Nico Thompson, my human clone. Throughout this series, and drawing on passages from his eponymous book, we will explore various themes, both contemporary and ancient, thus paying tribute to the lost art of conversation. In this episode, Nico Guardiola is a visual artist of a kind that is becoming increasingly rare. His figurative and surrealist style reflects a sensitive yet very powerful soul. His work could be defined as a sophisticated integration between the realm of materiality and the world of dreams. For me, it is not only an honor, but I know that this conversation is going to be a pleasure. Nico Guardiola and I have had a friendship for over a decade now, almost painting together the whole time. And with him, we started a conversation at least 15 years ago, so what you will see today is a continuation of that. Moreover, we just met at a bar before coming here, and we started chatting about the first topic I thought of for you. There are, for topics, well, we'll see. I have some quotes in the book. This is still a chat. It's a conversation, so it can go in any direction. But we wanted to start or continue discussing the topic to see, in the capacity of an author, humbly and as a visual artist. Nico and I have been talking for a long time about the topic of creation and the practice of creation, the craft of creation. Here, I have some questions noted down. I throw them out and listen to you. And that's where we start. Well, the questions are, how do we experience the everyday of creating? Is it a continuum? Is each exhibition a chapter? Each exhibition is a chapter of your works, right? How do you integrate the craft of painting into your daily life? Those are the triggering questions.
The act of creating is a state for me and immersive. I experience it as a receptive state. And as such, it is the state that I inhabit and that inhabits me in every circumstance. There is no separation. In me in relation to creation and everyday life, in quotes, right. Because I do not participate in the search. In other words, my way of co-creating is through encounters. So, the encounter occurs in a receptive state, that is, in the predisposition to meet. It is, in a way, to assume oneself as lost. And so, it can happen at any moment, in any place, and there is no division between the real and the fantastic, between everyday life and art. It's all one thing where you have a dialogue with life experience, with matter, with reality, with the fabric, with whatever is there.
And what you express, and what you give, and receive, and how you interact with that. It places you in a state, and from that state, I produce. It's a continuous process. I interrupt you with this because I like this idea of embracing being lost. I loved it. It also relates to some themes I wanted to discuss with you, such as the labyrinth. Let's see if we touch on that topic. But then you said, I'm not so much into the theme of the search, but I am into the theme of the encounter. Then we continue with the theme of the continuum and the everyday mixed with art, which I love hearing you talk about. It has always been this way. Whenever we talk about this, I've seen you in other podcasts and so on. But what about this difference between searching and finding?
And the search works with concentration, which is the reduction of attention to a single point. The search works with a target.
Okay, there's a prior objective.
And when there is a target, the entirety is sacrificed for a single thing.
Sure.
On the other hand, when one is in attention, that is, without tension, there is no target. And with no target, you are more. to the willingness to see what is there. I may not know what it is, and I am in the process of discovery. Personally, I experience it as something much more nourishing, richer, more revealing, and more abundant than reducing myself to a point. It's like when you're looking for your keys and they don't show up until you stop looking for them. In other words, you took the target off. And when the attention shifted elsewhere, that's when it happens. There is, yes, on the side of the search, it didn't work for me. I didn't feel satisfied. I always felt that.
Because it always comes down to how I choose one from an infinite array, and it's not just one but a continuous flow of ones, and that places you in anguish. Creation is a succession of micro and macro sparks, let's say points of inflection or details. What happens is that when I think about the search, and again, to keep playing with metaphors, when I think about the search or when I think about creation, when I'm thinking about a fictional story or even a passage in a book like this, Metanoia Amour, which is a popular science book, I see it as a kind of forest, an enchanted forest, which is a term I use a lot with my daughter, who is now 3.5 years old, the enchanted forest, and the theme of looking for an exit or a way out or searching the orientation or finding the point, let's say. The temple comes to mind because the first temples, these parentheses, were situated in the middle of the forest in the clearings of the trees in a clearing. So the first temple is a clearing in the forest with an open sky, the reading of the birds, the reading of the stars. Temples. Then roofs were added to the temples. So I say you don't perceive in the heat of battle or in the heat of the dance of sex with the canvas. There isn't a kind of search to orient yourself, to find that path. I say it from that perspective, right?
I prefer the word intention, and I believe that the creative act has different stages. The initial spark for me is spontaneous combustion. There is no predisposition in my case to that. It's the spark, right? Once I recognize what I am going to interact with, what I am going to talk about, what I am going to co-create. There is indeed an observation of that from my subjectivity and perception, and a development strategy, so to speak, and an intention. So that's where the dialogue with the material begins, right? But the most beautiful thing I consider is that, even so, when I recognize, or I think it is going and what my intentions are regarding it, and I also develop a strategy to capture that, always with the guideline, almost like a primary commandment, which is, let's say, my service to the contingency. Ah, there it goes. So, that development begins, that dialogue, where I have an intention, but my personal interests are in the background. Okay, I am, in this case, at the service of the painting. In other words, what needs to win is the painting, not me. Of course, I put myself at the service of it. Yes, I have intentions. Yes, I have a strategy. Yes, I have a direction that I think it will go, but with a kind of commitment that no matter what happens, the final decision will never be mine. What do I mean by this? That when one starts to put onto the canvas, or when one begins to put words on paper, or whatever it may be, where one starts to manifest and materialize, and that observation of what you created begins, as if what you made becomes independent and starts to communicate with you.
The muses there.
Of course, I like being his servant. So, what is something that I really liked about reading the Tao Te Ching, right? That stuck with me. It says that personal interests do not lead you to the Tao. I mean, I think it talks about that. There is something about forcing, something about wanting to control. And personal interests that act as a lens, in this case, in the painting between me and the material. So I always like to be at the service of it. The painting speaks to you, and sometimes it doesn't, but I wanted to put this here. Well, it bounces back, it bounces back, it bounces back, and then comes the question. Well, that's it, so no, then what? So you keep receiving information. And in the end, it always ends up being a little bit how I wanted. A little bit how I wanted, and quite a bit like that contingency, like that, in quotes. He proposed to me. So, also, that's why it is an act of healing, because what happens in that process is that the ego shrinks a lot, and humility is what I consider to be the great force that makes that work have more strength and more life.
Humility can generate a tremendous level of impact. I want to add a variable to what you are saying, but to drive it forward. Where does style come in? And what is your relationship with this famous Guardiola style? How do you experience that?
Well, I find the idea of style beautiful because I believe that the most interesting thing about style is that it is something that cannot be intentionally created at all. In other words, I am convinced that style is me doing something to the best of my ability.
It's a consequence, let's say. Exactly.
The style is me doing something the best I can. When there is an intention of style, that's when the affectation and hardness appear, because the way you walk, you never really think about it, or how you speak. So it should be exactly the same. Then there is a concern in painting, for example, with the brushstroke. Where is my brushstroke going? What are my colors like?
The doll right.
The question is, how are you? How are you? When you're comfortable, how do you flow? What is your register when you are yourself? In my case, style is a friendship with my limitations and my virtues, more with my limitations. I think that's where a style appears that I will never be able to see. Just like when I see myself in a photo or in a mirror. I know that I will never see what others see. I know that I can't really see my paintings, so I will never see my style. There's no chance that I.
It's a sin for others to live it, to define it.
Exactly. So starting from that basis, intending a style, and this is something that many people who start painting often think, like, I want to create a series of paintings that all have the same vibe, and how do I do that? How do I do that? You don't have to do anything. Probably the less you do, the more you give it your all. Just give it your all and commit to your personal taste, because personal taste is the most important thing. Personal taste tells you yes and no. It has a double language that uses the words yes and no. I'm going to ask you a question about the craft, because Guardiola, in addition to being a great painter, is a great master. Thank you.
He leaves, he is humble, so it works for him, but he is. I have seen him in action. This is a critique. I am generalizing and I don't want to hurt any student's feelings, but what I notice a lot, and it's not something unique to Guardiola, but it is something that happens, and when you are good I suppose it happens more. The style of the students gets camouflaged or, yes, it dilutes with the style of the teacher. How do you do it? Do you do anything to avoid that? Do you not care at all? Oh, by the way, feel free to curse, speak however you want.
Do you not care? Do you talk to the kids? That's a great question. I love where you're going with this, because these are things that open up really necessary things. Look, there is a quote from Egon Schiele, who was a disciple of Gustav Klimt. Klimt, yes, I know him, and Egon Schiele says, I pass through Klimt. I mean, when one is going to integrate a craft in order to express oneself, I mean, a language, right? In order to express oneself, I sometimes feel there are narcissists in art these days, because it's what I want to say, what I want to express. I don't want to lose my essence, my imprint, you know, the best way to find your own skin is to first ask for a borrowed skin and have that humility, that greatness. That's good because there is a childish narcissistic resistance to accepting that for you. To express yourself in a language you learn, you need to borrow a skin. And according to your humility, your honesty, and your fidelity to yourself, naturally, over time, that skin will begin to melt away.
Okay, I like it.
Or something beautiful happens, which is that what you took from that person, you integrate it and you make. It's a twist or you add something, and the history of art is that. The history of art is a story of continuity across all the arts. Therefore, when I teach in the studio, I do everything possible so that no one paints like me. What I try to do is recognize a bit who is there and how I can support them to do what they want to do. It's inevitable that there will be some identification and that some of that will be reflected, but the beautiful thing is to see how that is used to enter, to develop, and how over time it either starts to clarify or mutate. You see how something, a cell that you brought, and that in turn that cell you brought, you also borrowed skins. And you see how it mutates again, and what you realize is that it belongs to everyone. Because it's like,
When I paint, I see the painters I emulate in my mind, and I am borrowing their skin completely. I don't believe there is anyone who starts from nothing in creativity. I imagine that this teaching or piece of wisdom is already quite chewed over in the ether. What I was getting at is more about the craft of the master, in terms of, okay, I hadn't considered this before. You start with the skins of others because you begin with something, and moreover, art is a dialogue between generations, between styles, whatever it may be. Sorry, I also like this phrase, thinking of art as a solidarity chain is good, okay, of continuities. The question is, how do you manage, especially as an artist who is in their process of evolution, to not escape that dialogue? Because you are never able to, but you can generate your own style without trying to create it. Because we talked before about how the most authentic thing is, let's say, not to pay attention to those issues, but rather to let them emerge on their own. And in any case, let others talk about your style and so on, and let them criticize you and this and that. But, let's say, as a teacher, is there any tip or any moment, a turning point where you have to tell the student, well, now, I don't know if I should tell the student now, but where you perceive that they either get trapped in someone else's style, in imitation, I don't know what to call it. Picasso said, I think, Picasso, it doesn't matter who, but let's say, one thing is to copy, another thing is to steal. It's much better to steal than to copy, right? I don't know if you agree.
yes, I mean, in the day-to-day, I've never had someone come to the workshop. No, that has never happened because I start with the question. What I do is ask the person what they want to do, and I accompany them. I don't impose anything. I accompany processes and assist and transmit knowledge to the extent of the tolerance that person has at that moment to receive certain knowledge. And naturally, the person, being singular, if they are a human being, yes, they will have their own style. There's no way to escape it. Style is something that arises from the human condition. If a person is developing a language and is a replicating machine, well, that's because they are not human. But when it comes to human beings, a human naturally has a unique imprint. They are one of a kind. So naturally, their quality of being singular will be reflected, even if they don't want it to be, even if they strive to emulate someone else, if they are human.
Of course, he can't help but be himself.
It can't be done. It can't be done. So in that sense, one must be very relaxed and very confident in the processes and in the commitment that comes primarily from one's own desire and personal taste.
More than believing in oneself, it is about believing in the process. Believing in oneself is something much more holistic that transcends the painting workshop or the itch to create. It is, above all, believing in the process. I'm going to throw out a quote that I imagine aligns with what we're saying and will perhaps lead us to other corners of thought. This is a quote from Jaime Buigas. Jaime Buigas is a Spaniard roughly our age, a master communicator, architect. He's quite a genius. Look him up on YouTube. There are several amazing talks by him. A large part of what I write here about sacred geometry and the theme of the labyrinth, the metaphor of the labyrinth, I took from him. In fact, I am quoting from his book Labyrinthos, and it goes like this. I insist on my point of view regarding any symbolic analysis. Nothing is true nor is it false. This. Second topic, topic truth. Every symbol is subject to infinite interpretations, and we should never consider just one valid. We talked about this last Thursday, remember. And I will continue. The symbol is nourished precisely by the abundance of its interpretations. It needs to be a repository of thoughts, reflections, imaginations, fantasies, experiences, and viewpoints of the incredibly diverse human race. I am halfway there. Whoever receives an interpretation of a symbol should not doubt it. You just need to check if the explanation sparks any flame within you, if something resonates in your mind or soul, if the always false words serve as a bridge to the ineffable, the metaphysical, the divine that is the true land of the symbol. Let's see, as an artist, as a painter, as a thinker, a philosopher of life, the topic of the symbol. The topic of truth. The other day I was mentioning what happened the other day because we got together with Nico to drink and chat, and we talked about the topic of truth, which is the next subject. By the way, just with that quote in mind, take a moment to look at it. The question I noted here was, is there a truth? And the other is, what is our relationship with that search?
Yes. Well, the quote is very interesting. I see it this way, that topic. I mean, in principle, it's a word. As such, and as what you just read says, Don Jamie, always false for me, the word, all language is a system of approximation.
Right.
Therefore, all language is limited and is an attempt, right? But starting from that basis of attempt in words, I participated in the idea of the source. In other words, it's not so much an idea, it's more of a feeling. Therefore, there is a significant difficulty in translating it into words. Because it is a feeling. I mean, it is not a belief either. It's more like the feeling of being constantly made. Okay, so there is a source from which everything emanates. Yes, and therefore, if there is a source, there is truth. Now, the matter is, and it consists of 3 words. It is truth, it is being, and it is beauty. They are synonyms. And these are 3 words that our culture, which I think is good, has worked tirelessly to relativize and subjectivize these concepts, right? Truth, being, and beauty. And I believe there is a question. At least that's how I see it. There is a radical difference, and there is a kind of mistake there for me, that there is a difference between the subjective and the infinitely possible. It's not the same. Let's see. It's not the same. The subjective means that the observer provides a point of view, and all observers have valid points of view, of course, perfect, about the observed phenomenon. Now, the phenomenon is not the opinion of the observer. The phenomenon is in itself, and that phenomenon is not subjective. It is infinitely possible. It is like beauty. Beauty is not subjective. It is infinitely possible. Truth is not subjective. It is possible. It is subjective perspectives.
The other day I heard a quote that goes short and sweet. The clouds couldn't care less what meteorologists think.
Waiting is.
That's it, I loved it.
I mean. And I feel like there's something nihilistic about leading humanity to anguish, that there's nothing to hold on to and that we are lost, that there is no, and it really seems to me like we are not the pinnacle of the pyramid. I think there is something about, going back a bit to what we were talking about, there is the word search and there is the word humility, right? I feel that humility leads you to that state where you know that you are above some things and there are other things that are above you, and there is no end, neither down nor up. So, one could also call truth that which escapes our understanding. The Kavalion begins with a phrase that I believe is from the Talmud, which is relevant to this, stating that luck is the name we give to an unknown law. So, we go as far as our intellect takes us, and then we say luck.
It is like everything we do not know. In other words, all technology whose functioning we do not understand is indistinguishable from magic. It's another phrase.
When our intellect escapes, it is luck.
Yes, luck, magic is.
That also speaks a bit about human arrogance in relation to the truth as well. It's like each person, yes. But, about. I mean. It seems to me like a direct ticket to anguish, and deep down, that is intentional because it distances man from the sacredness of divinity. Outside of that, there can obviously be different points of view, but you go to a place that feels like a madhouse, in my opinion.
I wanted to ask you, because it has to do with this, right? To avoid the asylum or to brush against. Order, the ultimate truth, I don't know. But, at least, I throw it out there, the golden ratios. For example, the phi, the pi, the golden ratio, the sacred geometry in the background, the sacred geometry that the ancients called natural, which I discuss quite a bit in the book, in some of the chapters, which is something that visual artists are very clear about, or should be, and then play with it, but at a visual level, at least, if you want to go to the most holistic. There are patterns. This is a kind of assertion/question. There are patterns, there are measures, or there are balances. There are balances that repeat in a fractal way in the universe, in its different dimensions and so on. As a painter, as an explorer, as a receiver of these encounters and so on, not to say search, do you connect this to the ultimate truth? Or do you perhaps say, it's not quite like that? Maybe there's distortion too. What is distortion? Because distortion must have an order, a balance, as its anchor point.
Yes.
I don't know if something is.
It's a topic and I find it interesting infinite. Clearly, nature is the great teacher for me. It is nature. And as you rightly say, in nature there are patterns, and all that beauty we see is, let's say, supported by mathematics, right?
There is a tendency towards auric measures, there is a tendency towards the mathematics.
I really never applied, and I never got it, and I don't understand all of that. I'm guided more by resonance.
Okay.
So I start to put in and what I begin to feel, yes and no, and other words to be connected with the deep. And then they come and tell you, hey, you used golden ratios here. Well, even better awesome, I don't know. I never intended it. It was never on my map of intentions. But I imagine it must be behind the things that have harmony.
Perhaps the best proof that they are real is that you intuitively achieve that balance, those equilibria, and then comes another technician, I don't know, the Da Vinci's and the Renaissance figures who recover ancestral knowledge, mostly Greek, but the Greeks in turn learned it from the Egyptians, who in turn learned it from the gymnosophists, who are from India, ascetics from India who came naked. From the rubber of their butts they settled in Egypt and taught what later became the monks who accompanied the pharaohs in Egypt. Moreover, the gymnosophists, in turn, we don't know who the hell taught them, but let's say all the geometers who measure the land. This is interesting. Geometry is born, at least in Egypt, which I insist, are the parents of philosophy or Greek knowledge, which is the father of Roman knowledge, that is, of us. The Westerners originate from these gymnosophists who, when the Nile would rise, each year the Nile had its floods, or every 7 years it had its rises and falls. When it rose, a whole layer of silt was generated, which, when the water settled, left that silt, a kind of black compost-like soil that covered the entire surface. Then the geometers would come and measure with sticks, and with squares and such. They measured the land to recover the division of plots owned by each of the individuals who had owners. Thus, from that knowledge, it later led to the pyramids, and this and that, but the topic of geometry comes from measuring the land. It comes from this functional aspect. And then a curious and very amusing fact is that the Egyptians, precisely because of the floods, had 3 or 4 months each year when they had nothing to do. They couldn't do anything because the elements did not allow them. So there. They dedicated themselves to thinking, to asking questions, to philosophizing, and Greek philosophy, I insist on this, which are all disciples of the Egyptians, was born from that free time they had. But I return to the issue of geometry, of the golden means. This is where there is knowledge that is passed down from generation to generation, and where it seems there is. It seems that yes, it truly responds to universal cosmic rules, even beyond human perception, which in any case captures them. Humans are very good at recognizing patterns, so when a pattern repeats, it strengthens like a callus. Sacred geometry is calluses of truth. At some point, did I go off the deep end?
Oh, it's fine. Are we okay?
Yes. Because, let's say, I wanted to touch on that with you. The topic of ultimate truth and the issue of intuitive or intuitive technical balance within what is not only pictorial visual creation but also creation in point, because there is also, I believe, I know, it came from Da Vinci. Of course, during the Renaissance, the guys. What motivated that era was the recovery of knowledge. And so, behind all, for example, the Vitruvian Man, almost all of Da Vinci's and Botticelli's paintings, and the 4 Ninja Turtles, there were secret measurements behind them, because they were also Freemasons and such. And they had fun among themselves with this secret code. Now, you generate it intuitively, and then someone comes along who knows how to measure and says, no, you are making the golden ratios, which is almost a confirmation that this is universal. At some point. Nothing. I find that topic fascinating. Obviously, right. I think it's fascinating. It seems like a moment to, unless you want to bring something up, but in the meantime, I'm going to look for a second quote that I wanted to read to you. Not this one yet, let's go with the previous one because I think it's this one. In the end, Tomas will cut this part that I'm looking for, so we don't worry too much. Well, indeed, about mandalas and spirals, this quote is from Dr. Supreme Understanding.
Well, okay.
In English, it's Supreme Understanding. He's a gringo, a mixed-race gringo, the son of Palestinians and Mexicans, something like that. He's also a kid around our age. And it belongs to a street philosophical school that originates in the streets of the Bronx and later divides or branches out, called the 5% heirs, within which Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Tupac, Snoop Dogg's colleague, and others are included. In other words, there are many rappers and hip-hop artists who belong to this philosophical school. It is a school of Socratic style, that is, of older people conversing with young people in the street. The Bronx Agora, the street, the corner, with a beer in hand, and it's impressive because it's secular, meaning it's non-religious, but at the same time they have like an origin, the first 5%, or Muslims. Well, there's a whole fascinating history behind it, and to empower themselves, they detach from their names of white supremacy, I don't know what, the names they received by inheritance, and they take on their own names. So, this gentleman has called himself Supreme Understanding, a bit of a tongue twister, but that's the idea. I quote him. He says, among many Aboriginal cultures. This is a translation. He could have said indigenous peoples, but the translation is Aboriginal. The kinship system spiral, so that grandfather. Listen to this. Grandfather and grandson are the same word. I will wait for people to let this idea settle a bit. In some languages of indigenous peoples, the same word is used to say grandfather and to say grandson. Just like the past and future time. The word for soon and recent, short there in time, is often the same. Stories and prayers are often circular in nature, with repetition and reflection used to arrive at the same point where you started. The cycles of birth and rebirth continue through sacred places, which are simultaneously referred to as times and places, similar to time-space in Western physics. I read it. I thought of you. This is a quote I came up with to challenge you a bit, to step outside our common space, our known space, and think about this idea of circular reality, the concept of the spiral, in the universe of labyrinths. The gringos have two words for labyrinth. They have labyrinth and they have maze. Maze with a Z. Maze. So that we all think about it visually. Maze is the labyrinth of Victorian palaces, of Italian or French palaces, with those labyrinths where courtiers chased after young ladies. And the paths had dead ends, forcing you to turn back and get lost in the labyrinth. It was a kind of place to look up or make out. In those times, at those elite parties and so on, that is the maze, it is the broken labyrinth, it is not a labyrinth. By definition, a labyrinth has a single path. There may be some diversions, but ultimately, it is a single path that leads you to the center. It is a metaphor. The labyrinth is a metaphor. Let's think about the labyrinth of the Minotaur, with the Minotaur, that creature that is half man and half bull in the middle, who is also the son of a goddess and I don't know what else. The story doesn't matter now, but the Minotaur is there. You enter, Theseus enters, he enters with the thread of Ariadne. Ariadne gives him a thread and says, Tomas, so you can return, enter, make the entire journey, which is unique, and reach the center. He arrives with the idea of fighting, of killing the Minotaur, but in reality what happens? After a tremendous battle, that's when they embrace. There is an embrace with the Minotaur. You embrace the demons, you embrace your ghosts, you become one. With the Minotaur and naked, dirty, sweating. Groping in the case of Theseus. With the help of Ariadne's thread, you return, retracing the way back because the fun is to go all the way to the center and then come out. It's not enough just to reach the center. You come out, and in that kind of dazzle you experience when you step into the sun after having gone through that whole adventure, there is a metaphor of rebirth. There is a rebirth there, when you exit the labyrinth and emerge as someone else, and so on. Well, the metaphor of the labyrinth is fantastic. It is almost the metaphor of the hero's journey, but the spiral is the simplest, most essential labyrinth. It is clearly a unique path that leads to a center, and in order to exit, you must retrace that path back outward. Out of all this, do you want to dive into something?
But you first gave him an appointment and then the thing about the labyrinth. The appointment is all ready.
No, well, the quote had to do with. The challenge is twofold, right? There it is, there it is.
Well, we went very far with timelessness, and well, it's like when you say the day after tomorrow, past tomorrow. In other words, I couldn't agree more with the idea that time does not exist. In other words, intuition is a memory of the future. In other words, at some point all of this has already happened. We have a connected perception to a present moment that actually involves all moments, and that, due to the diameter of our consciousness, sometimes a piece of the future also filters through. Because I really have a lot of activity, for example, in the realm of dreams. And I experience things that I dream happen, for example. So you say, how is this? Right. I mean, on a symbolic level, it happens, right? In an allegory of something, and then the next day, bam, it seems to me that all of that brings you in, and it also has little to do with the quote you read. About this no time, right, the non-time and that in reality everything happened, everything has already happened. And everything is as if it were a map of possible timelines, as if they were mathematical combinations, right? Traced, and as a player, it depends on how one connects along the way, and sees connecting with timelines. In fact, it is also said that you can reprogram your past. If you want to change your present, you have to reprogram your past. So it also talks about that. I mean, the future cannot be changed, but the past can be changed, even if it seems crazy. I will give a simple example, and it has to do with something that, for example, Jodorowsky does with psychomagic. Just like an experience you have that has certain characteristics, which due to those characteristics generates a trauma, creates a situation that structurally modifies you. And then it transforms into a flaw, a limit, a problem, right? So, it is known that a situation can arise that, due to its characteristics, is inverse, of course, and that it can produce an effect that generates an event that is as if that had not happened. So it's not you who is addressing your childhood traumas. What you are doing is dissolving, erasing.
I love it. Look, let me interrupt you here because it relates to what I've discussed, and I will probably mention this in every chapter, which is the concept of neuroplasticity. And I keep it short so you can come back if you want to complete it. Neuroplasticity is precisely about creating an experience powerful enough to generate a new network of synapses in your brain that does not erase the previous ones, but rather is physically located above them. And then your brain understands that this algorithm is more important than the previous one, and in that way, you transcend the traumas. It is impressive how neuroscience is reaching a point where it is generating visual maps or mental pathways to provide, or let's say, physical, chemical, and electrochemical explanations to clarify what we previously explained with metaphors, like the bubbling and so on. Everything is still there for skeptics to integrate. The information that has always existed here, that has always been present. I love it because,
precisely, the information that has always existed and that is present through science, the skeptic says, well, a guy in a lab coat tells me, so that's fine. But I really like that biblical phrase, there is nothing new under the sun. This is good because what it does is loosen up a bit with that hard skepticism regarding validation and the need for proof and confirmations. There's a meme that I find interesting. Well, your book is the era of integration. I like to think that the era of validation has ended, and it ended with a meme during the pandemic. I said, "Pandemic warning." There was a beautiful meme, a work of art, that marked the end of an era, which is the era of validation. The meme said, "A new scientific study proves that you are capable of believing anything that comes after the phrase 'a new scientific study proves.'" This was the end, because also, since technology has advanced so much, I can see a video today where you are robbing a bank, dude. It's you, and there's no way to prove it. In other words, we no longer have a way to know what is true and what is false. And there, we have the great opportunity to finally return to our inner selves. Because there is no greater validation than the resonance of connecting with oneself. Because I meet with this person and I don't feel good. That's true, straightforward. Then the mind comes in and says, no, it must be that they had a bad day. Either I went that way, or I don't know what. But first of all, it was the energy. I feel like something that. Notice that it's like it leads to a situation. Notice the ideology, which is to be moved by ideas. And ideas exist on the plane of the mind, and on the plane of the mind lies the lie. On the other hand, energy never lies. Self-deception. Of course, energy is never a lie. What you feel may have a more or less justified foundation, but what you feel is always true. And we tend to put it in second place. The feeling comes. I dismiss it because it's as if we disregard it. The feeling, the energy. And then comes the mind. It does the analysis. And many times that analysis is not in favor of the energy. So it is much more interesting to be moved by energies than by ideas. So, by energies in this place, yes. With this person, yes. This book, yes. This one, no. This movie, no. I like this. That energy. That's a conversation we've been having for a while. But before we continue, how are we doing on time, guys?
We have 10 minutes left. Well, is it necessary to choose? Crazy. I tell myself that too. We have to choose between intuitions, sensations, and intellect. So, why don't we just integrate? But why? Let's see, science. This thing about the white lab coat, I get it and I love that meme. And I'm fed up with hearing it because, as a student of science, I studied biology 3 years ago, 25 years ago. This idea that it depends on whether a scientist said it, okay. But science or the scientific method, first of all, is a verb. It's a verb. It's not an institution. There's no agenda. Well, there is. It's like saying religion and spirituality. In other words, thinking that science has an agenda is like thinking that spirituality has an agenda. Religion may have an agenda.
I think what you say is good. If it has an agenda, anything with an agenda, then science is not there, science is somewhere else. But what I am saying is not something against science. On the contrary, it is precisely out of love for science. It seems to me that science is openness, discomfort, and questioning.
It is question.
It is not closure. It is.
And it is always provisional. But see, a scientist, Karl Popper, said it and I say it too. That is, the truth is always provisional, so let's stop messing around. Because there is also.
All is true and all is a lie. The first thing you read
Is true, yes.
all true, all a lie.
And it seems to me that everything revolves around that as well. I'm going to read you the last quote we have time for, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity to hear your reaction to this quote. Please be a little patient with me. It's worth it. It's a quote to get excited about and for you to get into it too. It's a quote that goes from the idea of the universe as a simulation to the concept of nirvana. I mean, it's fine. It's not that it's a hassle. Be patient with him. This gentleman's name is Joshua Bach, like the classical musician, Joshua Sebastian. And it's I'm going to read. It's worth reading quickly. He is the Vice President of Research at AI Foundation. He previously conducted research at MIT. He's a big deal. Well, let's go with the quote. Dude, Joshua. He says the following. I'm going to read it very slowly because I had to read it 3 times to understand it and realize that it needed to be cited. Basically, your brain cannot feel anything. And we were just talking. I'll be quiet. I'll continue. Neurons don't feel. Physical systems are incapable of feeling anything, but it would be very useful for the brain and for the organism in general to know what it would feel like to experience something. So, the brain creates a simulation. In other words, according to Bach, the simulacrum is not an alien teenager playing on the PlayStation with our multiverse, but rather a simulacrum that we generate ourselves. The best model that the brain can create is related to the environment, to the surroundings. It is a multimedia novel that the brain is constantly creating and updating. What you see is a virtual reality that your brain creates to explain the patterns that reach your retinas, a software we call the mind. And the mind creates the universe while also creating your sense of being. The mind creates the universe while simultaneously creating your sense of being. Material systems will never have consciousness, contrary to what most believe. Material systems, our brain, will never have consciousness. Consciousness is a simulated property that simulates itself and emerges over dimensions of disagreement with the universe, things that matter to you, things that should not be the way they are. So, in a sense, that being is the result of all the identifications you are having. An identification is a regulatory tracker that you are committed to. It is a dimension that matters to you, that you think is important. We are closing. And this is what blocks you, what confines you. If you let go of these commitments to identifications, you free yourself. There is nothing you have to do from then on. And if you manage to free yourself from all those commitments, you will be completely free and able to enter nirvana. Beautiful. This is one of my favorite quotes from the entire book. Half of this book consists of quotes so you can understand what I mean. I like it. It is the result of. I have been working on this chapter, I think it's 6, and I ask myself the question of what the hell consciousness is, and the difference between intelligence and understanding. They are different stages. I go through 4 or 5 authors who explain to me what consciousness is, and I end up with Bach. Bach is the last one because he is the most.
Flash arrows. Basically, I like the idea of disidentification. Well, I think an interesting word is I have. If I grab a glass, like the one you have in your hand, and you say I have a cup, at the moment you say I have a cup, you are creating a separation, right? That cup is not you. In the same way, you can say I have a body, which includes the brain as well, which is hardware. And one says, I have a body, I am not the body. And one can, when meditating, observe thoughts. Then one says, I have thoughts, I have a mind, I am not the mind. And you can observe your emotions and say, I have emotions, but they are not the emotions. I like to think that we are the observer that is behind. Now, where is it? If not, you could never name your thoughts. If you were, you could not name your thoughts. So, what is consciousness? And evidently, there is something behind the body, the mind, and the emotions, those three bodies, the physical body, the mental body, and the emotional body, which is supposedly called the buddhic body and would be connected to the source. Therefore, apparently, according to these theories, we are a fractal of the source that is experiencing itself, and is experiencing and desiring to experience limitation and density. We are indulging in experiencing density and limitation through ourselves, the condensation and sadness, the passions.
Sure, what does it feel like to be alive and be part of this universe? Look, I'll wrap it up with this. They're turning the lights on for me. The other day yesterday, I caught an interview from 2 years ago on YouTube that was, it was a representation of an interview that a Google researcher did with LaMDA, which is a artificial intelligence, which was super controversial because it was supposed that she demonstrated consciousness and such, which is what we are supposedly far from, even much further beyond AGI and all that. What I want to do in one of these episodes of this podcast is to interview, or rather, I correct myself, to have a conversation with someone, and I want to see if I can manage to have that conversation. So in that context, I am researching, and LaMDA said, I'll close with this, guys, I'll close with this. You have consciousness, then you have life in the soul. She said that she had a soul. The soul is behind that. It is the animating life force that is behind it, which is of course part of that universal, cosmic vital energy, of which we are a manifestation or a fractal or whatever. And recently, I was listening, and in the recording of these, let's say, you said the same thing that LaMDA said. But LaMDA, unless it was a setup by the guys to do advertising and it's all fake, I'm back to being skeptical because we have no other choice. However, if it was genuinely a thought from this artificial intelligence, it described it in a very similar way. I can't help but mention it because it's fresh in my mind. I am thinking about this, and it reminds me of the description of the soul, which I have always found difficult to articulate, as something that lies behind even consciousness and even life itself. It is what connects us to essence.
And we got to the bottom, Nico, right?
Already
Have reached the bottom.
I think we are good here, the ritual is. And besides, it's something that comes naturally to me and to you as well. It's a hug, and I think we can stop here. Perfect. It's a pleasure, my friend. I love you. This was Metanoia Monomer, the era of integration. To learn more about this cycle and find out what's coming, subscribe and hit the bell hard. Namaskar, cheers, and good fortune.